All right, this next session is deep. It's 110.3H. This is the safety program continuation with Derek Vigstol from eHazard. We're talking the risk assessment procedure. This has one is elements of a risk assessment procedure. 2 is human error, very important topic. 3 is hierarchy of risk control methods. Remember, on the human error, go check out Vince Barlow's session and also Wes Wheeler's session. So check out both of those sessions that I had. And don't forget, grab your Puppy Paws Chocolate Lab coffee. 10% discount below. Take care. Here with Derek Vigstol.
There's a lot in H.
In H.
Well, I got a good way to deal with H.
Okay, let's hit H. Do you want to hit H?
You want to hit H or you want to take a break?
It's up to you.
Well, once I get going, I might not stop. But we can go. All right.
Okay, well, so here we go.
So risk assessment, and the way you build this out in your ESP is you got to understand what risk assessment is trying to do. And 70E specifically calls out that risk assessments must be performed for both shock and arc flash. And so they're separate hazards. So we're going to do one for each. And it's to identify when a hazard exists in the work we're doing. It's to identify or estimate the likelihood of occurrence of injury from that hazard. And then what's the potential severity from that injury or hazard.
Right.
And then the result of the risk assessment helps inform us on, well, what the heck are we going to do about this thing?
Okay.
Right. So what H is saying is in your ESP, you have to come up with some sort of procedure to figure that out based on the equipment you have and all that stuff. Now, you may call balls and strikes and say, okay, we're gonna make sure every arc flash study is done on every piece of equipment, so everything has incident energy. So you're picking the method with how you estimate likelihood of occurrence.
Mm-hmm.
But it often gets missed to, again, remember, there's risk assessment from the employer standpoint. There's risk assessment from the worker standpoint. And the stuff that we can do ahead of time, the incident energy estimates, the voltage estimates, the boundaries, like we figure out what our shock boundaries are and arc flash boundaries, and we can do all that stuff ahead of time. But when we go to actually do the work, there's a whole lot of gaps we got to fill in. So what am I doing? How close am I getting to the equipment? What kind of, again,
details?
And I hate to bring this up again, but the condition of maintenance of the equipment and the potential for human error. Did I go out to my future brother-in-law's bachelor party last night and I come in for overtime on a Saturday morning and I'm not feeling so hot today, right?
Yeah.
And or is this something I've done 1,000 times before?
Yeah.
Or maybe it's something I'm doing for the first time.
Oh, yeah.
And
You
get this situational blindness when your brain thinks it's dangerous.
Situational blindness.
Yeah. Human performance is kind of a hobby of mine. I lay awake at nights thinking about this stuff.
That was beautiful.
But the idea that your brain perceives something to be dangerous, so it takes every piece of attentional resource that it has and it puts it onto the thing you're doing.
Yeah.
And you're super hyper focused on what it is you're doing. But then you do the thing, and simultaneously the best thing that could have happened and the worst thing could have happened all wrapped up in one nice little neat package is nothing happens.
Mm.
So you go about this thing, your brain told you it was dangerous. Hey, 80, you're get hurt. And you don't get hurt. Your brain puts a check mark next to it. Right?
Ooh,
but in that situational blindness, you could have had a broomstick on the floor over there. Could have had a puddle of water over here. Could have had a handrail missing on the end of the mezzanine
Yeah.
because they just lifted something up. I mean, there's all kinds of other things going on there. So now couple that with you've done it 1,000 times before.
Yeah.
So now you've got a little bit of situational awareness combined with complacency. And now you're getting into a recipe for really bad things to happen.
Yeah.
Because over time, what your brain does is it puts check marks next to those.
That's true.
And every check mark you get is a little bit less attentional resources that it has to put onto that. And so if your risk assessment doesn't account for the possibility of those things to exist,
Yeah.
Condition of maintenance is hard enough to have a conversation on.
Sure.
Human error
Oh,
is even worse.
I know. So we've got a few different. So on the element, the risk assessment portion, I've got the session I had with Wes Wheeler, and we talked about the dynamic risk assessment, that things can change, right?
Right.
During, and the one example he had was when you had two individuals working on a project, and somebody just walks right into their area that's unqualified and shouldn't be there. And he said, he had to tell that person to get out of that area, right?
Right.
That was not planned. It wasn't like you sat down in the job briefing and said, okay, you're going to do this, I'm going to do that, and then Joe's going to walk in and ask me what I want for lunch around 4:30, right while you are racking in the breaker, right? Right? That doesn't happen. Or, we'll have the active shooter at 6. That'll happen. None of that stuff is planned for. So you need to be able to think on your feet. And so the session I had with him was that active, I said, the ever-changing risk assessment or the dynamic risk assessment.
You like dynamic.
Yeah, I like the dynamic too. It's shorter.
Right.
So that was a really good session. Now, overlay that with my discussion with Vince Barlow. And Vince was talking about how, self-awareness and an emotional intelligence, right? So when you are on a job site and there are things changing, can you handle that, right? And can you handle the fact that so-and-so is doing this guy is now yelling for some reason, right? How do you think? Can you think in those types of instances?
And the sheetrocker's got who knows what kind of music blasting in the background.
Oh yeah, that's exactly right. And I maybe it's rap, country, or rock, or one of those that you don't like, right?
Right.
So now you've got to figure out, can I focus? And I always say it's about getting your head in the game, right? Or are you like you said? Are you thinking about the time you had last night?
Right.
Did you got in late? You're a little hungover, whatever. You needed the overtime. So the human error and this whole concept of your risk assessment and the procedures, therefore, sound like I'm thou start. Their procedures are really critical. And one of the discussion points that Vince and I had, we were talking about how his example was there's a leader or a person that he's coaching in a meeting, and that person, say, had some ways. The concern was how people reacted. Like, I had a really great idea, and then I look around the room and everybody is like just like twiddling their thumbs, and nobody acknowledged me for my great idea, that type of thing. And the conversations get violent or out of hand at some points. So he says that he sits in those meetings with those persons as a coach, and then be able to say, okay, hold on, guys, we're going to stop the meeting, and we're going. I would need to have a conversation, right? Because everybody knows that he's his coach, right?
Right.
So he says that in some of those instances, things get out of hand. Well, I went back and said, That's why in 70E and on a job site, we do pre-job planning. We know what tools are allowed. We create structure and hopefully have structure on the job site to avoid the squirrel moments of, oh, hey, I'm going to bring a come along because that rope might not work. And I'm going to bring this come along with a chain, right? No, that wasn't a part of the job evaluation. Nowhere in the instructions does it say we could possibly use a come along. And, and we're starting the job in 20 minutes. Don't start introducing these things right now. So you structure your work. Everybody knows their place in their job. And that brings order and discipline to the job site. It should.
It should.
It should. But I think that is what can be used to control human error in some cases.
It certainly can help minimize it. And it is one, if you go back into Annex Q, it is, I mean, pre-job planning and briefing is one of the human performance tools, but it's just one of them. We have several other back there, like three-way communication and post-job planning or post-job briefing. To have a recap on what went well and what didn't, and learn from mistakes, or
successes,
or learn from successes.
Right? Yeah.
But it's funny. So when you talk about kind of some of the things that Vince talks about in the book, like that reminds me of I've things in my personal life that I deal with, but working in a program where it's really all about going through a process to really understand who you are and how you're going to react in a certain situation. And do you build resentments up, and do you do things like that? Because the example you gave was you do the presentation to a group of folks at work and everybody's twiddling their thumbs, and what kind of emotion does that evoke in you, right? And do you respond or do you react?
Right.
And it comes when we're in a high stress situation. We need to be responding to it, not reacting to the high stress situation. And so one of the very things, and this is so hard to like keep these as separate sections when you think about the ESP, but one of the things that is going to keep coming back up is know thyself. And and what are your limitations? Don't be afraid. And we as an employer have to promote the ability within our employees to speak up when they're not comfortable with something.
Yeah.
And I applaud all of these employers out there that have incorporated like the stop, call, wait mentality into it. Now, there are some employers that tell every new employee on day one that anybody in the plant can shut the entire plant down if there's any ever something that they feel safe on. And then you hear anecdotal stories in the background of well, Timmy did that once. Timmy's not here anymore. And so it's one thing to say it, but then other thing to live it. And I've been to some places where it is absolutely just ingrained in their culture.
Yeah.
And again, we're just going to keep coming back to this concept of it's not a piece of paper, it's a culture that you got to build.
I like it. And the risk assessment is very complex. When you pepper in, especially the human error, and then to Wes Wheeler's point, you pepper in the dynamic nature of it. Things can change, weather can change, tools can change, all kinds of things, everything in your control and out of your control. And you have to know how to layer in Vince's, how do I deal with that change? How do I not take things personally? How do I get in touch with my own self to say, all right, this is happening. He's going nuts over here. This is going, the weather is storming. All right, we need to stop. Right. And then have the fortitude and the ability to say, nope, we're not going any further. Walking out over here and getting over here because I don't want an event.
Perfect example. My wife did it yesterday to me. Right. I've got a situation where I've got to retread all my stairs.
Yeah.
And should have been a day's work. But I have a house that was built in the 50s in New England. Found some things that needed to be repaired. Turned into I'm going on week 3 now.
Yeah.
Plus I travel a lot, so I'm not home all the time, right? But
Yeah, I know that.
But Sunday morning, the plan was, okay, we need to go down to this person who we were getting. We had contracted to do some services for us for something else. They didn't complete the job. They didn't do it correctly. So we had to go get our money back.
Mm-hmm.
Then we had to take our daughter to cheerleading practice. And then dad was going to work on retreading the rest of the stairs. I got 7 of them left to put on.
Wow.
Nice Sunday afternoon. Weather was beautiful. That's the plan. We planned it out. Here's the sequence. The sequence it's going to go in. Here's who's doing what. Proper tools and documentation. We need to have to do the whole thing, whole 9 yards. And we went to that first spot. The vendor who we were going to get our money back from.
Yeah.
It went off the rails.
Oh, really?
It went off the rails. And so it got really not good. And I'll leave it at that. But my wife had the wherewithal about me. She had enough sense about who I am as a person to say, you can't do the stair treads right because you're super anal about what they look like.
Yeah.
And these are $65 a piece.
Yeah.
You're going to go buy 15 more stair treads to get the 7 done that you need to get done.
Yeah.
So why don't we just put a pin in this? Like we've got the underlayment and we can use the stairs. So
sure,
let's put a pin in it because your potential for screwing up my stairs and costing us a whole bunch more money is way too elevated right now.
That's right.
Let's
postpone that until
the dynamic
so the platoon is better rested.
Yeah, the dynamic risk assessment. I love it.
Yeah, I'm telling you, dynamic risk assessment is.
Katie's gonna love to hear she was part of the story.
There we go. Exactly, Katie, we love you, and you're a saint if you're dealing with him. Oh, did I say that out loud?
She knows
it. All right, so I don't know. You know, a risk assessment could be a program unto itself.
Mm-hmm.
We know we have the elements, identify the hazards, which you already talked about, assess the risk, implement the controls according to the hierarchy of risk controls, which is in 3, and then 2 is the human error. So I think we've I don't know. Do you want to go any more in the
well? I mean, short of going into the specifics of risk assessment, although I would, if you indulge me, I would do a shock risk assessment because I don't think we pay enough.
Well, let's talk about a shock risk assessment.
Yeah, it is shock week.
It's shock week,
right?
That's right.
Shock week.
Shock week.
So we got to do a shock risk assessment, and in fairness, its cousin, the arc flash, gets all the attention. So the way I talk about this, and it does this procedure also helps with the arc flash risk assessment too. But so it's with shock, it's easier because it's basically around the fact of, do I have exposed parts or not, right? And they define in 70E exposed being capable of inadvertent contact or approach near in a safe distance by a person, okay, and then it's not suitably guarded, isolated, or insulated.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have to answer that question. Yeah. You know, and as a qualified person, we should be able to answer that question whether or not I have exposed circuit parts and conductors operating at above 50 volts, because that's really where my shock hazard is going to start. And then I go from there. The next piece is simple: is what is my proximity? So if I'm, and I use this example all the time, if I'm lucky enough to have a panel board in the back of the classroom I'm teaching, right? So hey, there's a panel board back there. Do I have a shock hazard right now? And everybody in the room says, no, the cover's on. All right, take the cover off. Am I exposed to a shock hazard right now? Well, the cover's off, but I'm 25 feet away from it.
Yeah.
Well, no, I guess you wouldn't. Really, would you? No. When does it become that I'm exposed to a shock hazard?
Yep. And you're in table 130.4EA.
Right.
And those are your limited approach boundaries.
Correct. So 70E says that a limited approach is the distance from those parts that are exposed.
That's right.
Within which a shock hazard exists.
So if you were at 240 volts, say it's a typical panel board, 240 volts, And it would not be a movable conductor. I don't know
It's
too
fixed.
many panel boards that move.
Well, I've seen some.
So, yep. And then you have exposed fixed circuit parts, right?
Mm-hmm.
Exposed fixed circuit parts. The limited approach boundary is 3'6".
Yeah.
And then the restricted approach boundary is 1 foot.
Now, where does the restricted approach boundary comes in the next stage of the risk assessment, though? The limited approach and exposed conductors was just in identifying, do I have a shock hazard in the work I'm doing, right?
Right.
So if the work I'm doing has exposed parts and I get closer than 3'6", I have a shock hazard in that task.
Yes.
Right? Now, coincidentally, it's also where 110.2b tells me I have to create an electrically safe work condition.
That's right.
So if I have a shock hazard, I've got to shut it off. That's the rule.
If you can. If you can.
Well, there's exceptions.
Right.
And this is why I like the change now to move them back into exceptions, because it makes it cleaner to say,
yeah,
the general rule in 70E is shut it off inside the limited approach boundary.
Yeah.
Exceptions to the rule are infeasible, additional hazard, normal operation, that kind of thing. But okay, so we've got exposed parts. We're in the limited approach.
It's
boundary.
a 240-volt panel board.
Now we look at, well, am I going to cross a restricted approach boundary?
Now and who can, right? So
we're not even there yet.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, we're not even there yet. But will my task that I'm doing require me to cross that restricted approach boundary?
And that's 1 foot.
1 foot for that 240-volt panel board. Okay. So that is going to speak to my likelihood of occurrence.
Right.
Because that's the definition of restricted approach boundary is the distance from exposed circuit parts and conductors where there is an increased likelihood of an electric shock.
So if I'm doing thermography, I take the dead front off, I'm exposing my parts. As long as I'm outside of 1 foot, I still have a shock hazard.
Correct.
Because I'm within the 3'6".
Correct.
But if I hired you and I said, hey, Derek, I need you to come over and take that panel board cover off for me because I'm not qualified.
Right.
But I am qualified to do thermography.
Yep.
And you take the cover off and I stand outside of 3'6" and I take my thermography, I'm not exposed to a shock hazard because I'm outside of 3'6" on a 240-volt panel board.
If you stay outside of 3'6".
That's it, yeah. And I just do my thermography. And then I tell you, hey, put the cover back on.
Yeah.
And you come back over, put the cover back on. Now you're exposed and you're even within the 1 foot because, well, you're putting the cover on, so you're no longer exposed, right?
Right.
And you put your bolts on. So you're exposed to a shock hazard. You're within the 3'6". That means you would have to appropriate PPE for shock hazards.
Yeah. So the glove requirement comes when I cross the restricted approach boundary. So a shock can exist.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so here's the other thing, the piece that gets missed in a shock hazard risk or shock risk assessment is we tend to say all the time that as qualified people, we can be inside the limited approach boundary, correct?
Yes.
Do we add on to that with justification? Can I go pull up and eat my lunch inside a
No. That's right. No, you have to have a reason to be there.
So what's my reason? I can go in to that limited approach boundary and take that panel board cover off because you need it off for your thermography. And I can take that panel board cover off while the equipment's still energized because you need the equipment to be at operating temperature.
Right.
So an interruption in service would screw up the readings.
That's right.
It's infeasibility.
That's exactly right.
Okay. Yeah. So where we get a little tricky though is what about putting it back on?
Well, so that was my thing was when I'm putting it on, I'm still in my opinion, whether I'm taking that cover off or I'm putting it on, I want my gloves.
100%.
Because you may lose control of the cover and accidentally touch something, right?
Yep.
And if you've got your insulated gloves on, you could be a bird on a wire, you could luck out and not actually cause a little mini arc flash. I mean, 240 volts, We can have the debate on the level of arc flash or whatever it would be. You definitely have the arcing going on. But I could be a bird on a wire and not have the event and go, ooh, that was close. But if I'm doing it with bare hands, then I can get electrocuted, inadvertent contact.
Oh, absolutely.
So I would say you would still I would say you are within the 1 foot because that cover is going to be within 1 foot.
Yep.
You're not working on the bus, but you're within the 1 foot.
Right.
There are exposed conductors in bus. So based on the risk analysis, you would have to wear your gloves.
I would say so.
I would say so too.
Well, but there's even an argument to be made about, do you need to have the power on to put the cover back on? Because you're inside the limited approach.
So you're saying, look, you're done with your thermography.
Yeah.
I'm going to turn it off and put the.
No.
Wow.
No, I can't make that call. I'm not going to make that call.
But if it's feasible, that would be advisable. If it's feasible, it would be advisable.
So what 70E states in 110.2, because there's 2 trigger points, which we hit the limited approach boundary one. But the second trigger point is, even with the doors and covers closed and in place, if there's an increased likelihood of the employee being injured from an arc flash, you also have to create an electrically safe work condition.
Yes.
So if I have a shock hazard or if I have an arc flash hazard, create an electrically safe work condition. So 70E's mindset is create an electrically safe work condition if you have a hazard, general statement. Yeah. Unless you meet one of these, I think there's 5 exceptions now.
Yeah. Yep.
So if you don't meet one of those 5 exceptions, how can you make the claim that you can't shut the power off?
No, you're right. You're right.
If you're following 70E.
Right. And you're done with your because thermography is a good example because it has to be energized. But it doesn't have to be energized when I take the cover off, and it doesn't have to be energized when I put the cover back on. It just has to be energized while I'm doing my thermography.
Yeah, I think there's so taking the cover off, I mean, that opens up another can of worms, because you want the equipment at normal operating temperature when you take the picture, correct?
Okay. You can make an argument.
You could make the argument.
You can make the argument.
But so a lot of people then say, well, I don't have to follow 70E. You just told me I don't because I got to follow OSHA. That's what I got to follow. All right, let's look at what OSHA says. OSHA says an employee live parts need to be de-energized before an employee works on or near them. And working near, obviously, we know what working on is. We're making contact.
Right.
But working near is defined in OSHA as being close enough to those energized parts to be exposed to a hazard. Where does that take place?
Oh, yeah. No.
The limited approach boundary.
That's right. That's the limited approach boundary. Yeah. Wow. That's interesting. So, yeah.
These are things that keep me up at night, though.
They keep you up at night.
Yes, they do, because I don't know how to say it. I know how to say it, but I don't know how to. Sometimes I have a hard time walking through, like, how do we take what the books say and how do we take how we get the work done and find that happy medium in the middle that does both?
No, you're right.
And here's where we get back to the acceptable level of risk for the employer. The employer has to say, okay, we're okay with you putting that cover back on because the risk, you're wearing your gloves, you're wearing your PPE, your arc flash PPE. The risk of you getting injured is low enough.
And you know what? You could have the procedure for that written up, and the controls in place might be, look, you're going to wear your gloves. You're going to do this. You're going to do that when you're putting that cover back on again to minimize risk, likelihood, and severity.
Yeah. And you're going to do a visual inspection of all the mounting hardware. Yeah. You make sure you have the right screws, make sure all the clips are in good condition. Right. They're not rusting and falling apart.
It's an acceptable level of risk.
Yeah. An employer has to make that. But where do we come up with this?
Right.
In our electrical safety culture.
Yeah, you're right. And it's not something that is decided on the fly.
No.
Because you're flying by the seat of your pants if you do.
Yes.
I love that.
You know, it reminds me of a joke my daughter told me.
What's that?
What do you call a fly with no wings?
Fly with no wings? I don't know why.
A walk.
What? I love it. That's a dad joke, you know.
That is totally a dad joke.
Now, the other risk assessment that I sometimes think about is the receptacle, right? Because we're looking at a receptacle. We're going to change a receptacle. We all go to the big equipment and gear and things like that. But the simple job of replacing a receptacle, you have a 3'6" boundary, right? Now, the restricted approach is not applicable. It says, don't touch it.
Maybe. If it's between 50 and 150, then that's the only voltage.
Say it's a 120 volt receptacle.
Single circuit in that box. Yeah. Then it's a void contact.
It's a void contact. That's the words. Yep. So now you have, though, a 3'6". So if I'm in a residential dwelling unit, technically, as an electrician, you're supposed to have your boundary set up and say, look, you're not allowed to come within this. I have exposed conductors here.
Yep.
Okay, I highly doubt anybody puts rope up around a receptacle, but technically you're supposed to have that distinguished. And but you have to. It applies to that 120 volt receptacle just as well as the 240 volt panel board or the 4160 gear that we just talked about.
Right.
You have your restricted approach. You know what tools you're allowed to bring in there. You know who's allowed to be within 3'6", right, of that space. You still need your gloves. Now the question: when I'm taking the receptacle cover off, do I need gloves? It just says avoid contact.
Avoid contact. Well, you're not touching the screws on the side.
I'm not touching the screws.
I would say you don't need your glove to take the faceplate off.
Right, but the moment I start to pull the receptacle out, if I'm going to say I need to pull it out for measurements,
then you need gloves.
You need gloves. It's energized. I can't turn it off because I'm troubleshooting. Okay, so I know this is going to be energized. I need to wear my gloves. I could make the argument that I could, in my policy, say, look, you're taking the cover off that receptacle, you're going to wear gloves. Okay, I could make that a part of my policy.
Right.
If I wanted to. But I could probably argue and say, look, taking the covers off, don't worry about the gloves. But anything beyond that, you're putting your gloves on. Okay.
If you're touching the parts, you gotta have the gloves.
You gotta have your gloves on because you are within. It's 120 volts, and that could kill you.
Right.
Doesn't take much, right?
You know the number one system for fatalities on low voltage equipment?
What?
120 volts.
Really?
This is most widely available, and every electrician's done it before. I don't care if
oh yeah.
I asked this question, and if you don't raise your hand in a group of electricians, you're lying to me. But how many people have said it's just 120?
I watched a guy. I was at a distributor. I was going to do a presentation, and they had like a little stage, and there was a receptacle right on the face of the stage. In fact, it's a picture in one of my LinkedIn or Facebook sites. The whole face of the receptacle was laying down. All that was there was the bare copper. Okay, it was really weird. You know how you see the plug? You have the like plastic,
the plates inside. Like
all I saw was the plates. The whole plastic and the faceplate came off. Okay, so I'm like, wow. I was going to plug my computer into there, and I told somebody. The maintenance guy come over. He's an elderly gentleman. He sat down and he took his screwdriver and literally it was this, and he's putting the screwdriver on. And I went, don't you want to turn that off first? And he goes, I don't know where the circuit is. It'll take me longer to find the breaker than it will just to replace this.
It's just 120.
It's just a 120 receptacle. So he started pulling it out and he starts to like undo this screw, but because of his shaking, it arced and tripped the breaker. Okay.
Hey,
yeah.
Shut up.
Yeah. I said, well, you're going to have to find it now, right? But I'll tell you what, I was sitting there in my mind. I told him not to. I told him I'm going to leave the room if you do this energized. He would not stop. I think it was when I was turning around and trying to figure out what am I going to do because I can't. I'm a guest.
Right.
It doesn't work for me. I made him aware of the hazard. He said he's been doing it for years. And he continued until he finally tripped the breaker. And thank God. So I was to blame. I'm sitting here contemplating, do I leave? And if I left and he got hung up, do I take responsibility because I wasn't there to knock him off of the circuit? to give him CPR if he should come in contact? You know what I'm saying? Do all of a sudden, I had this going in my head. Do I leave him alone? I was the only one in the room with him. Do I stay even though he's doing something I don't approve of? And I vocalized it.
Right.
Because now I got to say, well, if something happens to this guy, I'm calling 911, right? So it was a dilemma. It was a real dilemma that I had. And I was going through in my head. I didn't know what to do.
Well, now we know what keeps Tom up.
Kept me up that night. That's for dang all.
Talking about code nerd stuff, and you're like, I could have had somebody die.
I could have had somebody die in front of me, Tom was there to do a scene. It was on AFCIs and GFCIs. Tom was there to talk about GFCIs, and the guy got electrocuted in front of him. Yeah, and he's a witness now.
I always find that it doesn't look good on our resumes when we're in the safety world, and anybody around us gets. But the funny thing is, I've had several folks in class come up to me and say, the number one thing I learned about your class was, I'm like, what? I don't want to be your friend because you got a friend that got shocked here. You got a friend that was in an arc flash here. And I'm like,
oh my God.
Yeah, but I met them after the fact. They didn't get shocked because they were my friend. I met them because they're a shock survivor or an arc flash survivor.
Yeah.
Like,
now you got to say, I know a guy who has a friend. Yeah, you got to change.
I got to switch that up a little bit.
You got to switch that up. Yeah, that's not good. All right, so I think we're pretty much done with the risk assessment. We know it's a very complicated topic.
Yeah, just add the once you get the likelihood of occurrence.
Yeah.
The potential severity is what's going to help you determine what you're going to do about it, right?
Yeah.
So voltage is going to be based, my gloves are going to be based on my voltage. My arc rated PPE is going to be based on incident energy. Or maybe the incident energy is so high that I want to use remote racking or remote switching.
Right. Right.
So
it's election time, so I get these phone calls.
You get from that
866 numbers and all that stuff.
You probably get different phone calls here in West Virginia than I get in Massachusetts.
You're